Hey guys, tonight we are stepping through a shimmering, invisible doorway. Back to a time when a meal wasn't just served, it was presented to you by unseen hands, waiting silently behind little glass windows. Picture yourself on a bustling city street in, say, 1912. The air smells of coal smoke and horse-drawn carriages, mixed with the faint, intriguing aroma of hot coffee and baked goods. You push open a heavy door, and suddenly, the noise of the street fades, replaced by a low hum and the occasional, satisfying clink. Before you stretches a room unlike any you've ever seen, walls lined not with paintings or advertisements, but with rows and rows of small, glass compartments, each holding a single, tempting dish. This, my friends, is the Automat. It's a place so revolutionary for its time, you probably wouldn't survive the sheer novelty without fainting, or at least needing a strong cup of that famous coffee. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, just inside the door, taking it all in. The polished surfaces gleam under the electric lights, a modern marvel in themselves for many in this era. The air is warm and filled with the comforting smells of a busy kitchen, yet there are no visible waiters milling about, no bustling counter staff shouting orders. Just people moving along the walls, peering into the little windows, reaching out, and with a simple gesture, making a purchase. It feels a bit like being in a museum exhibit where you can actually eat the displays. And honestly, for the early 20th century, this was revolutionary. Forget white tablecloths or greasy spoon counters. This was something entirely new. The concept itself, this idea of mechanical self-service dining, wasn't entirely cooked up overnight in a New York basement, though that's where it truly found its iconic home. The Automat concept actually had roots in Europe, specifically Berlin, Germany. There, a company called Quisisana operated a similar, though perhaps less extensive, system. This is our mainstream historical fact for the section. The very first Automat restaurant using this coin-operated window system opened in Berlin in 1895. So, while Horn and Hardart perfected and popularized it in the United States, they were building upon an existing idea, bringing it across the Atlantic and scaling it up in a way no one else had imagined. Imagine explaining that transatlantic journey to a turn-of-the-century diner. Yeah, this sandwich came from a window based on an idea from Germany. Wild, right? As you look around, you notice the diversity of the clientele. Men in business suits stand next to factory workers in caps, women in elegant dresses next to those in simpler attire. Children press their noses against the glass, eyes wide with wonder at the edible treasures held within. This place feels accessible, unintimidating. You don't have to signal a waiter, worry about tipping, or feel rushed. You simply browse, choose, and pay. It's a level of autonomy in dining that was virtually unheard of for the average person at the time. It's like the original grab-and-go, but with significantly more charm and less plastic packaging. One of the quirky tidbits about these early automats was the sheer variety of items available, and how quickly things could change. While known for staples like coffee and pie, they also offered full meals, often behind those little windows. You might find anything from baked beans and macaroni and cheese to more elaborate dishes like chicken pot pie or even steak. And because the windows were constantly being restocked from the kitchen behind the scenes, you never knew exactly what treat might appear next. It was like a culinary slot machine, but you usually won something delicious instead of just disappointment and lint. This constant rotation meant the kitchen staff were in perpetual motion, a topic we'll definitely dive into later. Historians still argue whether this rapid turnover was purely about efficiency or also a deliberate strategy to encourage impulse buys and keep customers lingering, waiting to see what new delight might pop into view. Was it genius logistics or just delicious temptation? The debate rages on in dusty academic journals, probably fueled by lukewarm coffee and stale biscuits, unlike the glorious stuff served here. Standing there, you can feel the atmosphere. It's busy, yes, but there's a quiet efficiency to it. People move with a purpose, but without the frantic energy of a modern fast food joint. There's a sense of calm, a focus on the simple act of selecting and enjoying a meal. The sounds are muted, the gentle clinking of coins, the soft opening and closing of the window doors, the low murmur of conversation. It's a symphony of subtle mechanics and satisfied customers. You might even hear the distant, rhythmic swoosh of the coffee spouts being used, a sound that would become synonymous with the Automat experience. It's almost hypnotic, isn't it? Like being inside a giant, delicious grandfather clock. The sheer novelty of the mechanism is part of the charm. You see someone approach a window, their eye caught by a slice of pie. They reach into their pocket, pull out a coin, likely a nickel in the earliest days for many items, and drop it into a slot next to the window. There's a soft click, a whir, and voila, the little glass door pops open. They lift out their pie, and the door swings shut, ready to be restocked from the other side. It's so simple, yet so utterly fascinating. It feels almost magical, this transaction between you, a coin, and a waiting meal. No human interaction required for the basic purchase, just you and the machine. It was the ultimate introverted dining experience before introverts were even a recognized demographic. Excuse me, could I just buy this pie, without speaking to anyone? Thank you, lovely inanimate object. You take a tentative step forward, drawn deeper into the room. The smell of coffee is particularly strong now, beckoning you towards a counter area where gleaming metal spouts promise liquid warmth. But your attention is still fixed on the walls of food. It's a visual feast, a kaleidoscope of colors and textures behind the glass. Sandwiches neatly stacked, salads in small bowls, desserts glistening under the lights. Each window is a little stage, showcasing its edible star. The anticipation builds as you scan the options. What will you choose? A hearty main dish for sustenance, a light salad, or perhaps go straight for a tempting dessert? The power is entirely in your hands, well, and in your pocket, depending on how many coins you have. It's a level of immediate gratification that would make even the most impatient modern diner nod in appreciation. Okay, fine, this is faster than waiting for them to call my name. This initial step into the Automat is more than just entering a restaurant. It's entering a different world. A world where technology intersected with daily life in a way that felt futuristic yet grounded. It was efficient, democratic, and held an undeniable charm. It promised good, clean food, served quickly and affordably, without the fuss or formality of traditional dining. It was a place where the transaction was transparent. You saw what you were getting, you paid your coin, and you received it instantly. There were no hidden costs, no awkward social cues to navigate, just you and the food. It was the ultimate vending machine, elevated to an art form, a culinary gallery where the exhibits were delicious and readily available. And as you stand there, surrounded by the quiet hum and the tempting displays, you feel the pull of its unique magic. It's a feeling that will stay with you as we continue our journey, exploring how this simple idea grew into an American institution. You stand there, just inside the door, feeling the pull of this place, this strange, wonderful blend of mechanism and meal. It feels almost like stepping into the future, seen through the eyes of someone from the past. But how did this future arrive? Who looked at the world of dining and thought, "You know what this needs? More coins and little doors." The answer lies with two men, a partnership forged in the bustling, competitive culinary landscape of late 19th century Philadelphia, Joe Horn and Frank Hardart. Joseph Horn was the business mind, sharp and focused on efficiency and scaling. Frank Hardart was the culinary soul, obsessed with quality ingredients and impeccable taste. They were a classic pairing, the strategist and the craftsman. They met in Philadelphia in the late 1880s, both working in the restaurant industry but feeling there was a better way, a way to serve quality food to more people, more quickly, and more affordably. Their initial ventures were more conventional restaurants and lunchrooms, building a reputation for good coffee and fresh food. They were successful, certainly, but they hadn't yet stumbled upon the idea that would make their names synonymous with the dining revolution. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, as we briefly touched upon, the seed of the Automat concept had already been planted. In Berlin, Germany, a company called Quisasana had opened a restaurant featuring coin-operated windows for food delivery back in 1895. Horn and Hardart, ever on the lookout for innovative ideas, somehow caught wind of this European curiosity. Perhaps they read about it in a trade journal, or maybe one of them traveled abroad, though travel wasn't quite as breezy as hopping on a budget airline back then. It was more steamship and seasickness. However they discovered it, the idea clicked. They saw the potential. Take this intriguing mechanical system and combine it with their own commitment to quality food and efficient service. It wasn't just about the novelty of the machine. It was about using the machine to deliver their product. Securing the rights or the technical know-how wasn't a simple matter of downloading an app from the German App Store, which, shocker, didn't exist. They had to negotiate, likely travel, and figure out the engineering required to replicate and scale the system. This wasn't just buying a ready-made solution. It involved understanding the mechanics, the plumbing, for the coffee, and how to build walls that were essentially giant dispensing machines. It was a significant investment in time, money, and faith in an unproven concept for the American market. Imagine trying to get a bank loan for that pitch today. So it's a restaurant, but the walls serve the food. Yes, walls. With little doors. And you pay with nickels. Trust me, it's the future. Their gamble paid off. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that Horn and Hardart opened their first Automat in the United States on June 9, 1902, at 818 Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. This wasn't their first restaurant, but it was their first Automat. And it was a sensation. People were utterly fascinated. They lined up not just to eat, but to witness this mechanical marvel. It was dining as performance art, except the art was edible and you didn't have to pretend to understand it. You just dropped a coin and got pie. Glorious. Philadelphia embraced the concept, but the real explosion of fame and expansion came when they brought the Automat to New York City in 1912. New York, with its dense population, diverse workforce, and constant need for speed and efficiency, was the perfect petri dish for the Automat to thrive. The first New York Automat opened in Times Square, of all places, a location that guaranteed maximum visibility and a constant flow of potential customers, from theatergoers to office workers. It quickly became an iconic part of the city's fabric. Horn and Hardart weren't just selling a novelty, they were selling trust. They understood that people needed to feel confident that the food behind those mysterious doors was fresh, clean, and worth their hard-earned coin. They built their reputation on this. They famously sourced the best ingredients, often directly from farms, and maintained incredibly high standards of cleanliness and preparation in their central kitchens. More on those hidden heroes later. Their coffee, in particular, became legendary, consistent, hot, and delicious. They weren't just restaurateurs. They were pioneers in quality control and supply chain management, long before those terms were buzzwords. Now, for a quirky tidbit about their early operations, Joe Horn was notoriously meticulous about the coffee. He insisted on using only the finest beans and, perhaps more interestingly, he was adamant about the water quality. He believed the water used to brew the coffee was just as important as the beans themselves. In their early days, before municipal water systems were universally reliable and filtered to modern standards, this was a significant concern. There are accounts, though perhaps leaning towards legend, that suggest Horn would personally inspect the water sources or even had specific filtration systems designed just for their coffee preparation. It wasn't just about taste. It was about consistency and purity, ensuring that every cup, from every spout, tasted exactly the same, every single time. It's the kind of detail that sounds a little obsessive, but it's also the kind of obsession that builds a legendary beverage. Like, did they have a water sommelier? Probably not, but you get the idea. Looking back, historians still argue whether the primary driver of the Automat's initial, explosive success was the sheer novelty of the coin-operated technology itself, or the consistent quality, affordability, and speed of the food and coffee that Horn and Hardart provided. Was it the magic of the machine that drew people in, or the reliable, delicious meal that kept them coming back? It's a classic chicken and egg scenario in historical analysis. Did the mechanical marvel make mediocre food acceptable? Or did the great food make the mechanical marvel indispensable? The debate rages on in the annals of food history, probably over cold leftovers, unlike the hot, fresh options we're contemplating. As you stand here, imagining that first automat in 1902 Philadelphia or 1912 New York, you can almost hear the sounds of those early days. The excited chatter of people seeing the windows for the first time, the rhythmic clinking of coins, the satisfied sighs after that first sip of famous coffee. Horn and Hardart didn't just open a restaurant. They launched an experience, a new way to eat in the city that was efficient, clean, and surprisingly dignified. They took a European concept, refined it, and scaled it into an American institution, forever changing the landscape of quick, accessible dining. They were the quiet pioneers, the men who built a culinary empire one nickel at a time, all thanks to a vision that started with a few simple windows and a very good cup of coffee. You stand there, just inside the door, feeling the pull of this place, this strange, wonderful blend of mechanism and meal. It feels almost like stepping into the future, seen through the eyes of someone from the past. But how did this future arrive? Who looked at the world of dining and thought, "You know what this needs? More coins and little doors." The answer lies with two men, a partnership forged in the bustling, competitive culinary landscape of late 19th century Philadelphia, Joe Horn and Frank Hardart. Joseph Horn was the business mind, sharp and focused on efficiency and scaling. Frank Hardart was the culinary soul, obsessed with quality ingredients and impeccable taste. They were a classic pairing, the strategist and the craftsman. They met in Philadelphia in the late 1880s, both working in the restaurant industry but feeling there was a better way, a way to serve quality food to more people, more quickly, and more affordably. Their initial ventures were more conventional restaurants and lunchrooms, building a reputation for good coffee and fresh food. They were successful, certainly, but they hadn't yet stumbled upon the idea that would make their names synonymous with the dining revolution. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, as we briefly touched upon, the seed of the Automat concept had already been planted. In Berlin, Germany, a company called Quisisana had opened a restaurant featuring coin-operated windows for food delivery back in 1895. Horn and Hardart, ever on the lookout for innovative ideas, somehow caught wind of this European curiosity. Perhaps they read about it in a trade journal, or maybe one of them traveled abroad, though travel wasn't quite as breezy as hopping on a budget airline back then. It was more steamship and seasickness. However they discovered it, the idea clicked. They saw the potential. Take this intriguing mechanical system and combine it with their own commitment to quality food and efficient service. It wasn't just about the novelty of the machine. It was about using the machine to deliver their product. Securing the rights or the technical know-how wasn't a simple matter of downloading an app from the German App Store, which, shocker, didn't exist. They had to negotiate, likely travel, and figure out the engineering required to replicate and scale the system. This wasn't just buying a ready-made solution. It involved understanding the mechanics, the plumbing, for the coffee, and how to build walls that were essentially giant dispensing machines. It was a significant investment in time, money, and faith in an unproven concept for the American market. Imagine trying to get a bank loan for that pitch today. So it's a restaurant, but the walls serve the food. Yes, walls. With little doors. And you pay with nickels. Trust me, it's the future. Their gamble paid off. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that Horn and Hardart opened their first Automat in the United States on June 9, 1902, at 818 Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. This wasn't their first restaurant, but it was their first Automat. And it was a sensation. People were utterly fascinated. They lined up not just to eat, but to witness this mechanical marvel. It was dining as performance art, except the art was edible and you didn't have to pretend to understand it. You just dropped a coin and got pie. Glorious. Philadelphia embraced the concept, but the real explosion of fame and expansion came when they brought the Automat to New York City in 1912. New York, with its dense population, diverse workforce, and constant need for speed and efficiency, was the perfect petri dish for the Automat to thrive. The first New York Automat opened in Times Square, of all places, a location that guaranteed maximum visibility and a constant flow of potential customers, from theatergoers to office workers. It quickly became an iconic part of the city's fabric. Horn and Hardart weren't just selling a novelty, they were selling trust. They understood that people needed to feel confident that the food behind those mysterious doors was fresh, clean, and worth their hard-earned coin. They built their reputation on this. They famously sourced the best ingredients, often directly from farms, and maintained incredibly high standards of cleanliness and preparation in their central kitchens. More on those hidden heroes later. Their coffee, in particular, became legendary, consistent, hot, and delicious. They weren't just restaurateurs. They were pioneers in quality control and supply chain management, long before those terms were buzzwords. Now, for a quirky tidbit about their early operations, Joe Horn was notoriously meticulous about the coffee. He insisted on using only the finest beans and, perhaps more interestingly, he was adamant about the water quality. He believed the water used to brew the coffee was just as important as the beans themselves. In their early days, before municipal water systems were universally reliable and filtered to modern standards, this was a significant concern. There are accounts, though perhaps leaning towards legend, that suggest Horn would personally inspect the water sources or even had specific filtration systems designed just for their coffee preparation. It wasn't just about taste, it was about consistency and purity, ensuring that every cup from every spout tasted exactly the same, every single time. It's the kind of detail that sounds a little obsessive, but it's also the kind of obsession that builds a legendary beverage. Like, did they have a water sommelier? Probably not, but you get the idea. Looking back, historians still argue whether the primary driver of the Automat's initial, explosive success was the sheer novelty of the coin-operated technology itself, or the consistent quality, affordability, and speed of the food and coffee that Horn and Hardart provided. Was it the magic of the machine that drew people in, or the reliable, delicious meal that kept them coming back? It's a classic chicken and egg scenario in historical analysis. Did the mechanical marvel make mediocre food acceptable, or did the great food make the mechanical marvel indispensable? The debate rages on in the annals of food history, probably over cold leftovers, unlike the hot, fresh options we're contemplating. As you stand here, imagining that first Automat in 1902 Philadelphia or 1912 New York, you can almost hear the sounds of those early days. The excited chatter of people seeing the windows for the first time, the rhythmic clinking of coins, the satisfied sighs after that first sip of famous coffee. Horn and Hardart didn't just open a restaurant. They launched an experience, a new way to eat in the city that was efficient, clean, and surprisingly dignified. They took a European concept, refined it, and scaled it into an American institution, forever changing the landscape of quick, accessible dining. They were the quiet pioneers, the men who built a culinary empire one nickel at a time, all thanks to a vision that started with a few simple windows and a very good cup of coffee. And speaking of those windows, let's turn our attention to the ingenious heart of the Automat experience, the mechanical marvel itself. You're still standing there, remember, perhaps a little overwhelmed by the scale of the place, but increasingly drawn to those walls of glass. Each window is a small stage, framed perhaps in polished metal or dark wood, maybe 12 to 18 inches square, though they varied in size depending on what they held. Behind the glass, perfectly lit and presented, sits a single serving of food. A slice of pie, a sandwich, a small bowl of mac and cheese, maybe a whole dinner plate in a larger compartment. It's like a gallery of gastronomy, except instead of admiring from a distance, you're invited to interact. The mechanism itself was deceptively simple, yet remarkably effective for its time. Next to each window, or sometimes integrated below it, was a slot. This is where the magic happened. You, the customer, would identify the item you wanted, let's say that tempting slice of cherry pie. You'd reach into your pocket, pull out the required coin, which, for many of the standard items like pie, sandwiches, and sides, was historically a nickel. The mainstream historical fact here is that the nickel was the standard, iconic price point for many items in the early days of the Automat, making it incredibly affordable for the average person. Imagine getting a decent meal component for just 5 cents. That was real value. You'd insert the nickel into the slot. There would be a satisfying clink as the coin dropped, followed by a soft mechanical whir or click. This sound was the signal that the transaction was complete and successful. Inside the wall, the coin triggered a mechanism that unlocked the corresponding glass door. It wasn't instantaneous, but quick enough. The door would pop open a few inches, or sometimes swing outward slightly on a hinge. It was an invitation. Now, here's where the engineering got clever. These weren't just simple locked boxes. The windows were double-sided, designed to be restocked from the kitchen area behind the wall. Think of it like a revolving display case, but without the revolving. When you, the customer, opened the front door by inserting your coin, the back door, facing the kitchen, would lock. Conversely, when a kitchen staff member put food into the compartment from the back and closed their door, that action would lock the back door and reset the mechanism, allowing the front door to be unlocked by a coin again. It was a continuous loop of stocking and dispensing, ensuring that the food was always accessible to the customer from the front and the staff from the back, but never both at once. This ingenious system meant the staff could replenish items without needing to interact with the customers out front. It was like having a team of culinary ninjas secretly stocking your pantry through the wall. One quirky tidbit about the mechanism was its surprising robustness, but also its need for constant care. With thousands of transactions happening daily across hundreds or even thousands of windows in a large automat, these mechanisms took a beating. They were primarily mechanical, relying on springs, levers, and locks triggered by the weight and size of specific coins. While designed to be durable, they weren't maintenance-free. A team of mechanics was constantly on duty, working behind the scenes to ensure every slot accepted coins correctly, and every door popped open reliably. If a mechanism jammed, maybe someone tried to use a slug, or a coin got stuck, that window would be temporarily out of service. You might see a little "out of order" sign placed on it from the kitchen side. Imagine the pressure. You just have to have that specific piece of pie, but its little door is refusing your money. The horror! Historians still argue whether the primary psychological appeal of the automat was the sheer novelty of the mechanical transaction itself, or the feeling of complete control and anonymity it offered the customer. Was it the futuristic spectacle of a wall dispensing food that drew people in, or the simple dignity of being able to choose and pay for your meal without having to ask anyone, wait for service, or worry about judgment? It's a fascinating question about human behavior and technology. Did people love the machine, or the freedom the machine provided? The debate continues, probably whispered quietly over a solitary cup of Automat coffee in a historical society archive. The process of selecting and purchasing was a little ballet. You'd walk along the wall, peering into the windows. The glass was kept sparkling clean, a testament to Horn and Hardart's obsession with hygiene. You could see the food clearly, making your choice based purely on visual appeal and what your stomach was rumbling for. Once you decided, you'd reach for your coin purse or pocket. The act of pulling out the coin, feeling its weight, and inserting it into the slot was a tactile, satisfying experience. The clink was the punctuation mark on your decision. Then, the gentle resistance as you opened the door, the reach inside to retrieve your prize, and the soft click as the door swung shut again, ready for the unseen hands in the kitchen to restock it. It was quiet, efficient, and deeply personal. No awkward fumbling with change, no misheard orders, just you and your chosen meal, facilitated by a simple, elegant machine. It felt like a direct connection to the food, bypassing the usual social friction of dining. It was the original frictionless checkout experience, decades before anyone dreamed of scanning a QR code. This mechanical ballet of windows and coins wasn't just a gimmick, it was the foundation of the automat's efficiency and appeal. It allowed for high turnover, quick service, and a consistent, predictable interaction. It democratized the dining experience by removing the need for tipping or navigating social hierarchies often present in waiter service. You paid your nickel, you got your food. Simple as that. And in a bustling, fast-paced city, that speed and simplicity were incredibly valuable. It was the ultimate vending machine, scaled up to feed hundreds, a testament to early 20th century ingenuity and a little piece of mechanical magic that captured the public's imagination, one coin at a time. You've seen the mechanism, felt the potential clink in your pocket, understood the ingenious back and forth of the little doors. But let's be honest, you didn't step into this time machine just to admire the engineering, did you? You came for the food. And as you stand there, scanning those walls of glass, you realize this isn't just a collection of vending machines. It's a full-blown restaurant, presented in a revolutionary way. The windows are a stage, and the food is the star. You can almost hear a tiny, unseen maitre d' announcing each dish with a flourish. Tonight's special, behold! Macaroni and cheese, approximately 6 inches squared. Imagine the sheer variety. Row after row, compartment after compartment, each holding a different temptation. It wasn't just cold sandwiches and pre-wrapped snacks like you might find in a modern vending machine. Oh no. This was real food. Hot dishes sat in heated compartments, their surfaces perhaps glistening slightly under the internal light. Baked beans, often a hearty and popular choice, sat next to what looked like individual portions of macaroni and cheese, its cheesy top browned and bubbly. There might be chicken pot pie, its crust golden, or perhaps slices of meatloaf with gravy. Casseroles, stews, vegetables, a surprising range of comfort food classics, all waiting behind their individual panes of glass. Then there were the cold items. Neatly stacked sandwiches, often cut into appealing shapes or arranged just so. Various salads in small bowls, potato salad, coleslaw, perhaps a simple greens salad. Hard-boiled eggs, sometimes dyed festive colors around holidays. And, of course, the desserts. Oh, the desserts. Slices of pie, apple, cherry, pumpkin, lemon meringue with its peaks toasted just right. Cakes, puddings, jello mold shimmering under the light. Each item was presented with care, often on simple, clean plates or in small glass dishes, looking far more appealing than anything you'd expect from a machine. It was a culinary kaleidoscope, constantly shifting as items were bought and replenished. Choosing your meal here was an entirely different experience than ordering from a menu or pointing at a steamed tray. It was a purely visual decision. You'd walk along the wall, your eyes scanning the options, your stomach rumbling in anticipation. You could take your time, browsing every single window, weighing the merits of the chicken pot pie versus the meatloaf, the apple pie versus the lemon meringue. There was no waiter hovering impatiently, no need to make a quick decision under pressure. You were free to peruse, to deliberate, to let your eyes guide your appetite. It was like window shopping for dinner, except you could actually afford everything in the display. Well, assuming you had enough nickels. This emphasis on visual appeal and variety was a deliberate strategy by Horn and Hardart. They understood that since the customer couldn't interact with a server or ask questions about the food, the presentation had to do all the talking. The food had to look fresh, clean, and utterly delicious. And it had to be varied enough to appeal to a wide range of tastes and times of day. They offered breakfast items in the morning, heartier fare for lunch and dinner, and snacks and desserts available all day. The mainstream historical fact here is that Horn and Hardart was renowned for the quality and variety of food offered through the Automat windows, challenging the public's perception of what machine-dispensed food could be. They didn't just sell convenience. They sold good food conveniently. One quirky tidbit about the food selection was the seasonality and regional variations. While staples like coffee, pie, and baked beans were constants, the specific hot dishes or salads might change depending on the time of year, available ingredients, or even the location of the automat. A New York automat might feature different local favorites than one in Philadelphia. This added another layer to the culinary carousel. You never quite knew what specific delights might be available on any given visit. It kept things interesting, like a delicious, edible lottery where every ticket was a winner of food anyway. You might show up craving macaroni and cheese, only to find a new, intriguing casserole beckoning from behind the glass. Decision paralysis, the original version. Historians still argue whether the primary driver behind a customer's choice at the automat was the visual appeal of the dish behind the glass, the low, fixed price point, especially the iconic nickel items, or the psychological effect of seeing items constantly being replenished, creating a sense of freshness and availability. Did people pick the brightest, most appealing slice of pie, the cheapest option their nickels allowed, or the dish that just popped into the window, suggesting it was piping hot and just made? It's a fascinating look into early consumer behavior in a unique retail environment. The debate continues, probably over a meticulously catalogued collection of vintage Automat menus. Think about the contrast with other dining options of the era. A formal restaurant required time, money, and navigating social customs. A greasy spoon diner offered speed and affordability, but perhaps lacked cleanliness or variety. The Automat carved out a unique niche by offering the speed of a diner, the cleanliness and variety approaching a good restaurant, and the affordability of, well, a vending machine, but with significantly better quality control. You could assemble a full meal, piece by piece, choosing exactly what you wanted, in the quantity you desired, without any pressure. Want 2 desserts and a side of beans? Go for it. The wall doesn't judge. The act of making your choice was part of the charm. You'd finally settle on that slice of pie. You'd check the price. Hopefully, it was a nickel item. You'd fish out the coin, walk up to the window, drop it in the slot, hear the wonderful clink and whir, and gently pull open the door. Reaching in to retrieve your prize felt like opening a tiny treasure chest. The warmth from a hot dish compartment, the coolness of a salad bowl, the simple weight of a plate, these were all part of the sensory experience. And as you took your item, the door would swing shut behind it, ready for the unseen kitchen staff to place the next tempting portion inside. It was seamless, efficient, and deeply satisfying. It bypassed the awkwardness of pointing at menu items or trying to get a busy waiter's attention. You controlled the transaction, from browsing to retrieval. It was empowering, in its own quiet, food-focused way. This culinary carousel wasn't just about selling food, it was about selling an experience. The experience of choice, of autonomy, of immediate gratification, all wrapped up in the charming package of coin-operated mechanics and gleaming glass. It transformed the simple act of getting a meal into a small adventure, a delightful interaction with a wall that seemed to magically produce whatever your heart and stomach desired. It set a standard for quick, quality dining that would influence generations of restaurants, even as the Automat itself eventually faded into memory. But for now, in this moment, surrounded by these edible displays, the magic feels very real and very delicious. You've browsed the windows, felt the magic of the mechanical transaction, and maybe even picked out that perfect slice of pie or that comforting bowl of mac and cheese. But as you stand there, mesmerized by the edible display, a thought might occur to you: where is all this food coming from? It seems to appear magically, replenishing the windows as soon as an item is taken. If the walls are dispensing the food, who is putting it in the walls? Ah, my friend, you're asking the right question. Behind that gleaming facade, beyond those seemingly solid walls, lies the true engine of the Automat, a bustling, tireless, incredibly efficient kitchen operation. Stepping behind the scenes of an early 20th century Automat kitchen would have been like entering a culinary factory, albeit one focused on freshness and speed. These weren't small, cramped restaurant kitchens. Especially in the larger, high-volume city locations, the kitchens were vast, spanning significant floor space, often taking up the entire back area of the restaurant, and sometimes even multiple floors above or below. This was where the real work happened, the constant, unseen labor that kept the magical windows stocked. The scale of operation was immense. Horn and Hardart didn't rely on individual kitchen staffs in each location to prepare everything from scratch daily. While some finishing touches or assembly might happen on-site, much of the core food preparation was centralized. The mainstream historical fact here is that Horn and Hardart pioneered the concept of central commissary kitchens to supply their numerous Automat locations, ensuring consistency and quality across the chain. This was a revolutionary idea in the restaurant industry at the time. Instead of each restaurant having its own full kitchen staff making everything, massive, state-of-the-art facilities were built to produce food on an industrial scale. Think of it like a giant, incredibly well-run catering company that only serves its own restaurants through walls. These commissaries were marvels of early 20th century food production. They were equipped with large ovens, massive mixers, and specialized equipment designed for mass production. Teams of chefs, bakers, and kitchen staff worked around the clock, preparing everything from thousands of pies and cakes to huge batches of stews, casseroles, and salads. Ingredients were often sourced directly from farms or markets, emphasizing freshness and quality, a core tenet of the Horn and Hardart philosophy. They built their reputation on good, honest food, and that started in the commissaries. Once prepared, the food was transported from the central commissary to the individual automat locations. This required a sophisticated logistical operation for the time, involving trucks and strict timing to ensure the food arrived fresh and ready to be placed into the windows. Imagine the planning required to get thousands of slices of pie, still warm from the oven, to dozens of locations across the city, multiple times a day. It was a logistical ballet, performed daily. At the individual automat location, the kitchen staff weren't just reheating, they were the crucial link between the commissary and the customer. Their job was to receive the food, keep it properly stored, hot food hot, cold food cold, and most importantly, constantly replenish the windows. This required incredible coordination and vigilance. They had to monitor the windows from the back, seeing which items were selling quickly and needed refilling. They had to manage inventory, anticipating demand for different dishes throughout the day. Picture the scene behind the wall, a corridor lined with the back sides of the automat windows. Staff members, often called fillers or stockers, would stand ready with trays of freshly prepared food. As a customer out front inserted a coin and took an item, the door on the kitchen side would briefly lock. Once the front door closed, the kitchen door would unlock. A filler would immediately open the back door, slide a fresh portion of the dish into the compartment, close the door, and the mechanism would reset, making the front door ready for the next customer and their coin. It was a continuous, silent operation, a well-oiled machine of food delivery. One quirky tidbit about this process was the communication system. How did the kitchen staff know what was needed where, especially in a large automat with hundreds of windows? While they could see the empty windows from the back, anticipating demand and ensuring the right items were ready required more. Some larger automats reportedly used simple signaling systems, perhaps colored lights or small indicators on the kitchen side of the windows that would light up when an item was running low or needed replenishing. Other accounts suggest more low-tech methods, like managers or floor staff out front communicating needs back to the kitchen via speaking tubes or even just shouting orders through a service door. It was a blend of nascent technology and old-fashioned communication, ensuring the flow of food never stopped. Imagine trying to coordinate that without walkie-talkies or a digital inventory system. More meatloaf in Section B. And hurry, Mrs. Higgins is giving the empty window the evil eye. Historians still argue whether the primary success of the automat's kitchen operation lay in the efficiency of the central commissary system, the tireless work ethic of the on-site kitchen staff, or the ingenious design of the double-sided windows that facilitated constant replenishment. Was it the mass production that kept costs down, the dedication of the workers who kept the windows filled, or the technology that made the transfer seamless? The debate continues, likely fueled by lukewarm coffee and a deep appreciation for early 20th century logistics. The kitchen staff weren't just stockers. They were also responsible for maintaining the legendary cleanliness that Horn and Hardart was known for. The windows were constantly being wiped down from the kitchen side, the floors kept spotless, and the equipment meticulously cleaned. This commitment to hygiene was a major selling point for the automat, especially in an era when food safety standards weren't always as rigorous as they are today. Customers trusted that the food behind the glass was not only fresh but also prepared and handled in a clean environment. The sheer speed of the operation was breathtaking. In peak hours, items would be taken from the windows almost as fast as the staff could put them in. This constant turnover meant the food in the windows was genuinely fresh. Hot items stayed hot because they weren't sitting there for long periods. They were being replenished every few minutes. Cold items remained chilled. It was a system designed for maximum freshness through rapid throughput. It was the original fast food, but with a focus on quality that modern fast food chains often struggle to replicate. You weren't getting something that had been sitting under a heat lamp for hours. You were getting something that had likely just arrived from the commissary or been placed in the window moments before. So, while you stood out front, marveling at the mechanical magic and contemplating your next bite, remember the unseen heroes behind the wall. The chefs in the commissaries, preparing food on a massive scale. The logistics teams, ensuring timely delivery. And the tireless staff behind the windows, constantly stocking, cleaning, and coordinating the flow of food. They were the hidden engine, the human element that powered the charming, coin-operated world of the Automat, turning a mechanical novelty into a functioning, successful, and beloved dining institution. They were the ones who ensured that when you dropped your coin, there was always something delicious waiting for you behind the glass. It was a monumental effort, all happening out of sight, making the magic out front possible. You've peered behind the curtain, seen the tireless work happening out of sight to keep those windows filled with deliciousness. But there's another element of the Automat experience, one that had its own dedicated station, its own iconic sound, and arguably its own legendary status: the coffee. Even amidst the dazzling array of food behind glass, for many, the true heart of the Automat was its coffee. And as you wander towards the center of the room, perhaps clutching that slice of pie you just liberated from its glass cage, the rich, intoxicating aroma of freshly brewed coffee draws you in. Unlike the food, which lived behind individual doors, the coffee was dispensed from a central counter, a gleaming bastion of polished metal and steaming spouts. These spouts weren't just functional, they were often works of art themselves. Imagine heavy, ornate metal fixtures, sometimes shaped like dolphins, or dragons, or simply elegant, curved brass or nickel pipes, emerging from a backdrop that might be tiled or mirrored. They looked less like coffee dispensers and more like something you'd find in a Victorian-era fountain or a steampunk inventor's workshop. They were beautiful, promising liquid warmth with a touch of theatrical flair. Getting your coffee was another simple, satisfying transaction. You'd approach the counter, cup in hand, often a sturdy, clean white ceramic cup provided by the Automat, stacked nearby. Near the spouts were slots, just like the ones for the food windows, though perhaps accepting a different coin or multiple coins for the coffee price. The mainstream historical fact here is that Automat coffee was famously affordable, often costing just 5 or 10 cents, and was served via iconic, self-serve spouts, allowing customers to pour their own cup. This low price point and self-service model made it incredibly accessible and popular. You drop your coin into the slot, and with a soft hiss and a rhythmic swoosh, the coffee would begin to flow from the ornate spout. It poured hot, fast, and in a steady stream. The sound of that pour became instantly recognizable to Automat regulars, a comforting, familiar noise that signaled a fresh, hot cup was just moments away. You'd fill your cup to your desired level, maybe add cream and sugar from nearby dispensers, and step away, ready to enjoy your beverage. It was a simple act, but the combination of the elegant spout, the satisfying sound, and the rich aroma made it feel special. Now, about that bottomless cup legend. While it wasn't literally infinite coffee for one price, the Automat coffee was known for its incredible value and the ability to get refills. For the initial low price, you got a generous cup. And in many locations, particularly during certain hours or for a slightly higher initial price, you could return to the spouts for refills. This wasn't a formal, bottomless policy in the way some modern restaurants might advertise, but rather a very liberal approach to refills that effectively functioned as one for most customers. You could linger, sip your coffee, and return for more without feeling pressured or needing to pay again immediately. This encouraged people to stay, relax, and use the Automat as a social space, which we'll talk about soon. It was the original co-working space with unlimited coffee, though maybe a bit louder. The key to the coffee's success wasn't just the price or the spouts. It was the quality and consistency. Horn and Hardart took their coffee very seriously, as we briefly touched upon with Joe Horn's obsession with water quality. They used high-quality beans, roasted them carefully, and brewed the coffee in massive quantities behind the scenes. It was kept piping hot, often using steam or jacketed urns, and constantly replenished. The spouts themselves were designed to deliver a clean, hot pour every time, preventing the coffee from sitting and becoming bitter. The freshness was paramount. You weren't getting the bottom of a pot that had been sitting for hours. You were getting coffee from a system designed for high turnover and constant brewing. One quirky tidbit about the spouts themselves is that urban legends sometimes circulated about the source of the coffee. Given the self-serve nature and the hidden mechanics, some customers jokingly or genuinely wondered if the coffee came from some mysterious, perhaps less than appetizing, source behind the wall. Of course, this was entirely untrue. The coffee came from meticulously cleaned, large-scale brewing equipment in the kitchen. But the mystique of the automated system allowed for these playful, slightly suspicious notions to take root. Was it brewed by tiny coffee-making gnomes? Probably not, but you couldn't prove it wasn't just by looking at the spout. Historians still argue whether the primary appeal of Automat coffee was its low price and perceived, bottomless, nature, the unique and satisfying experience of pouring it yourself from the ornate spouts, or the consistent quality and freshness that Horn and Hardart maintained. Was it the value proposition that drew people in, the novelty of the self-serve mechanism, or the simple fact that it was just a reliably good cup of coffee? The debate continues, probably over lukewarm coffee and faded photographs of dragon-headed spouts. Think about the impact of this accessible, affordable, and reliably good coffee. For many city dwellers, especially those working long hours or on tight budgets, the Automat became a haven not just for a meal, but for a comforting, hot beverage. You could duck in, spend a few cents, and get a quality cup of coffee without needing to sit down, order from a waiter, or feel obligated to buy food. It was a quick, dignified way to get a caffeine fix or just a moment of warmth on a cold day. It offered a small luxury that was available to everyone, regardless of their social standing. The experience of getting coffee at the Automat was distinct from any other part of the meal. While the food windows were about choosing and retrieving individual items, the coffee spouts were about a continuous flow, a shared resource that everyone could access. There was a communal aspect to gathering near the coffee counter, a quiet camaraderie among those waiting their turn or adding milk and sugar. It was a hub within the hub, a place where people might briefly make eye contact or exchange a nod before finding a table. And the taste? Descriptions from former patrons often praise its strength, its freshness, and its consistency. It wasn't fancy, artisanal coffee by modern standards, but it was good coffee. It was the kind of coffee that fueled the city, that warmed hands on a winter morning, that offered a moment of respite during a busy day. It was the perfect accompaniment to that slice of pie or that bowl of baked beans. It was the essential element that tied the whole Automat experience together, making it feel less like a collection of vending machines and more like a welcoming, albeit mechanically assisted, restaurant. So, as you stand there, your cup filled with steaming, dark liquid, you appreciate not just the taste and the warmth, but the ingenious system that delivered it. The ornate spouts, the quiet swoosh, the promise of freshness and affordability, it was all part of the magic. It transformed a simple necessity into a small, daily ritual, a moment of automated comfort in the bustling unpredictability of city life. It was the unsung hero of the Automat, the constant, reliable presence that kept people coming back, one coin, one cup, one satisfying pour at a time. You've got your coffee, maybe that pie you liberated from its glass prison, and you find a small table. As you settle in, taking that first, satisfying sip of the legendary brew, you start to notice something beyond the mesmerizing walls of food. This place isn't just a high-tech vending machine hall, it's alive with human presence. People aren't just grabbing their food and rushing out the door, though you certainly could. They're lingering. They're sitting at tables, talking, reading newspapers, or simply watching the quiet ballet of the Automat unfold around them. This place, designed for speed and efficiency, has somehow become something more, a social sanctuary. In an era before widespread fast casual restaurants or readily available public meeting spaces that didn't require a purchase or membership, the Automat offered a unique kind of neutral ground. It was clean, well lit, warm in the winter, and cool in the summer. The low prices meant you didn't have to spend much to justify occupying a seat. You could buy just a cup of coffee for a nickel and sit for an hour, reading the paper or meeting a friend, without feeling the pressure to order more or vacate your table for waiting customers, as you might in a more traditional restaurant. This was a key part of its appeal. It provided dignity and comfort along with food. Think about the urban landscape of the early 20th century. Cities were booming, filled with newcomers, factory workers, office clerks, artists, students, and people from all walks of life. Finding a place to meet, to rest, to simply be in the city without spending a lot of money was genuinely difficult. The Automat filled that void. It became a de facto community center for many. People arranged to meet friends under the clock. Many automats had a prominent clock as a meeting point, conducted informal business meetings, or just found a quiet corner to escape the hustle and bustle of the street. It offered a sense of belonging, a public space that felt safe and accessible to almost everyone. It was like the original third place, decades before coffee shops tried to trademark the concept. Except instead of artisanal pour-overs, you had dragon-headed spouts and baked beans. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that the Automat served as a vital social hub in urban life, providing an accessible and affordable meeting place for diverse groups of people. It wasn't just about the transaction of food. It was about the human connection facilitated by the space itself. People weren't interacting with servers, but they were interacting with each other. You'd see groups of office workers on their lunch break, students studying over coffee, elderly individuals enjoying a quiet afternoon, or friends catching up after work. The shared experience of navigating the windows, the communal nature of the coffee counter, and the simple act of sitting together at a table fostered a sense of community. One quirky tidbit about the social scene at the Automat involves its role during the Depression era. As economic hardship increased, the Automat's affordability became even more critical. It wasn't just a place for a quick, cheap meal. It was sometimes the only place people could afford to eat out, or even just to sit in a warm, safe place. There are numerous anecdotal accounts and historical records suggesting that during the worst years of the Depression, automats became unofficial daytime shelters for the unemployed or those down on their luck. You could nurse a single cup of coffee for hours, finding refuge from the cold or the rain, without being hassled by staff. While not an official policy, this tolerance for lingering further solidified the Automat's image as a compassionate, democratic space. It was a place where you could maintain a shred of dignity even when times were tough. Historians still argue whether the primary reason for the Automat's success as a social hub was its deliberate design and pricing strategy aimed at encouraging lingering, or simply a happy coincidence resulting from its affordability, comfort, and the lack of traditional table service pressure. Did Horn and Hardart intentionally cultivate this atmosphere to increase foot traffic and repeat business? Or did the public simply adapt the space to their own social needs because it was convenient and welcoming? The debate continues, probably over a single shared slice of pie, carefully divided to stretch the budget. The atmosphere itself was conducive to relaxation and conversation. While the front area with the windows could be busy, the dining areas often featured comfortable seating, good lighting, and a generally pleasant ambience. As we'll discuss later, the architecture and decor were often quite appealing, adding to the sense of being in a place of quality, not just a utilitarian eating establishment. The sounds were relatively muted, the clinking of coins, the soft whir of the mechanisms, the gentle murmur of conversation, the occasional swoosh of the coffee spouts. It wasn't silent, but it lacked the loud clatter of dishes and shouted orders common in many other restaurants. It was a calming environment in the midst of a busy city. Imagine meeting a friend here. You arrive, find a table, maybe leave a coat on a chair to signal it's taken, though this wasn't always foolproof in a busy Automat. Your friend arrives, you both browse the windows together, perhaps offering suggestions or marveling at a newly stocked item. You pay for your selections, grab your coffee, and return to your table. The conversation flows easily, punctuated perhaps by a trip back to the coffee spout for a refill. There's no waiter interrupting, no bill being presented prematurely to hurry you along. You control the pace of your meal and your visit. It was a level of autonomy in social dining that was quite revolutionary. You could have a full conversation without anyone hovering, which, let's be honest, is a rare and beautiful thing even today. Try having a heart-to-heart over a drive-through speaker. It's not the same. The diversity of the crowd also contributed to the unique social fabric of the Automat. It was one of the few places where people from vastly different social classes and backgrounds could interact, or at least share the same space, without overt class distinctions. A wealthy businessman might be selecting a pastry from the window next to a factory worker grabbing a sandwich. This democratic aspect, fueled by the uniform pricing and lack of service staff to judge or categorize patrons, made it a truly public space in the best sense of the word. It broke down some of the invisible barriers that existed in other parts of society and the city. Even for solitary diners, the Automat offered a sense of connection through shared experience. You might not talk to the person at the next table, but you were part of a community of people who appreciated the efficiency, the affordability, and the unique charm of the place. Watching others interact with the windows, hearing the familiar sounds, seeing the constant activity of the unseen staff behind the glass, it all contributed to a feeling of being part of something larger, a shared urban ritual. It was like being in a silent disco, but with food instead of music, and everyone was just doing their own thing but in the same room. So, while the mechanical marvel and the delicious food were the obvious draw, the hidden magic of the Automat was its ability to foster community and provide a genuine social sanctuary. It proved that efficiency and technology didn't have to come at the expense of human connection. In fact, by removing some of the traditional social friction of dining, it created a space where people could connect on their own terms, over a shared love for affordable food, good coffee, and the simple charm of a wall that served you dinner. It was a place to eat, yes, but it was also a place to belong, even if just for the duration of a cup of coffee and a slice of pie. You're sitting there, enjoying that coffee and pie, watching the quiet flow of people. And as you watch, something else becomes apparent, something that was profoundly important about the Automat in its time. Look around again. Really look at the people occupying the tables, browsing the windows, heading to the coffee spouts. Notice the sheer diversity of the crowd. This isn't a high-end restaurant catering only to the wealthy elite. It's not a working-class saloon or a ladies' tea room. It's everyone. In a society that was often rigidly stratified by class, income, and social standing, the Automat was a remarkable anomaly. It was a place where social barriers seemed to melt away, or at least become significantly less pronounced. A stockbroker in a suit might be selecting a sandwich from the window right next to a factory worker in overalls. A woman in an elegant dress could be pouring coffee next to a student. Families, elderly couples, single individuals, they all mingled in the same space, engaging in the same simple act of choosing and purchasing their meal from the wall. Why was this the case? Several factors contributed to the Automat's uniquely democratic atmosphere. First and foremost was the pricing. As we touched upon with the iconic nickel items, the food was genuinely affordable. This wasn't cheap, low-quality fare. Horn and Hardart prided themselves on serving good food at prices accessible to the average working person. This immediately opened the doors to a vast segment of the population who might have found other restaurants too expensive or intimidating. You didn't need a large disposable income to eat well here. You just needed a few coins. Second, and perhaps even more impactful, was the lack of traditional table service. There were no waiters to judge your attire, assess your potential tip, or subtly steer you towards more expensive menu items. The transaction was between you and the machine. You didn't have to make small talk, worry about etiquette, or feel out of place because you weren't familiar with formal dining customs. You simply paid your money, got your food, and found a seat. This removed a huge layer of social friction and intimidation that often existed in restaurants of the era, making it a comfortable space for people from all backgrounds. It was the ultimate equalizer. The wall didn't care how much money you had in the bank, only how many nickels you had in your hand. Which, arguably, is its own kind of barrier, but a much simpler one to overcome than navigating the unspoken rules of high society. The mainstream historical fact that underscores this is that the Automat was widely recognized for its accessibility and was one of the few public spaces in early 20th century American cities where people from different social strata regularly interacted or shared space without overt class distinctions. It offered a level of dignity to every patron, regardless of their background. You weren't being served by someone who might look down on you. You were being served by a machine that treated everyone equally. That's a powerful statement, even if the machine was just following mechanical instructions. The atmosphere itself, while sometimes busy, was generally calm and orderly. People moved with purpose but without the frantic energy you might expect from a high-volume eatery. There was a quiet respect for the space and for fellow patrons. The cleanliness standards, which Horn and Hardart rigorously maintained, also contributed to this sense of dignity. This wasn't a dingy, questionable establishment. It was a clean, bright, and appealing place to be, a small oasis of order and comfort in the often chaotic urban environment. You could feel good about bringing your family here, or meeting a friend, or just finding a clean place to rest your feet and grab a bite. One quirky tidbit that highlights this democratic aspect is the anecdotal evidence and occasional photographs showing surprising individuals patronizing the Automat. While it was a haven for the working class, it wasn't uncommon for celebrities, artists, or even wealthy socialites to discreetly visit an Automat. Perhaps they were drawn by the novelty, the efficiency, or simply the desire for a good, unpretentious meal or cup of coffee without the fuss and attention they might receive in more exclusive establishments. There are tales, possibly apocryphal but persistent, of famous actors grabbing a quick bite before a show, or well-known writers finding inspiration over an affordable meal. It was a place where you might literally bump elbows with someone famous while reaching for the same slice of pie, and neither of you would feel particularly out of place. Though I imagine a celebrity trying to find a nickel might have been its own kind of drama. Historians still argue whether the primary impact of the Automat's democratic dining experience was its role in genuinely fostering social equality by creating a shared space, or whether it simply reflected the reality of urban life where different people inevitably occupy the same public spaces, but without necessarily breaking down deeper societal barriers. Did the Automat actively promote equality, or did it simply accommodate the diverse population of the city in a way that was more visible than other establishments? The debate continues, probably over a cup of coffee that costs significantly more than a nickel, pondering whether true social mixing can ever be automated. This sense of being a place for everyone extended beyond just the customers. While we'll talk more about the hidden kitchen staff later, the visible employees, often cashiers who exchanged larger currency for nickels, or floor staff who cleaned tables, also contributed to the atmosphere. They were often depicted as friendly and efficient, adding a human touch to the otherwise automated experience. They were there to help if you needed change or had a question, but they weren't part of the core food transaction, maintaining that sense of customer autonomy. The Automat didn't just sell food, it sold a feeling of independence, of dignity, and of belonging to the bustling life of the city, regardless of your station. You could come in, spend what you could afford, get a clean, tasty meal, and sit in a comfortable environment for as long as you liked. Within reason, of course, they still needed the tables eventually. It was a lifeline for some, a convenience for many, and a fascinating spectacle for all. It was a place that proved that efficiency and affordability didn't have to mean sacrificing quality or respect for the customer. In an age when many public spaces were segregated or exclusive, the Automat stood out as a truly public place, open and accessible to all who had a few coins. It wasn't a utopian ideal of perfect equality, of course, but it was a significant step forward in creating a more inclusive urban environment. It offered a simple, dignified way to eat, meet, and simply exist in the city, side by side with your fellow citizens, regardless of their background. It was a testament to the idea that good food and a welcoming space could be for everyone, a charming, coin-operated symbol of democratic dining in action. You've felt the quiet hum, smelled the coffee, seen the parade of people from all walks of life, and perhaps even reached into a little glass door to claim your edible prize. But as you sit there, observing this unique environment, you might sense a fascinating tension at play. On one hand, the Automat was a marvel of industrial efficiency, a system designed for speed, volume, and standardization, almost like a factory for food delivery. On the other hand, it possessed an undeniable charm, a warmth, and a welcoming atmosphere that made it feel less like a sterile machine and more like a beloved institution. This blend, this paradox of efficiency meeting charm, was arguably the secret sauce behind the Automat's phenomenal success. Think about the efficiency side first. The coin-operated windows? Pure mechanical genius aimed at speed and reducing labor costs. No waiting for a waiter, no fumbling with bills and change, just a quick transaction between you and the wall. The central commissary system we peeked into? A logistical masterpiece for its time, ensuring consistent quality and allowing for mass production, driving down costs and speeding up preparation at the individual locations. The constant replenishment of the windows from the hidden kitchen? A well-oiled machine designed for maximum throughput, ensuring minimal waiting time for popular items. Even the self-serve coffee spouts were about efficiency, allowing customers to pour their own meant fewer staff needed at the counter during peak hours. It was a streamlined, optimized system, built for the fast pace of urban life. It was like the original assembly line for lunch, except instead of cars, they were assembling, well, sandwiches and pie. But if that was all it was, just a hyper-efficient vending machine hall, would it have captured the public imagination and loyalty the way it did? Probably not. That's where the charm came in. Despite the mechanical nature of the service, the Automat wasn't cold or impersonal. The architecture and interior design, which we'll explore more deeply soon, were often stunning, featuring gleaming surfaces, ornate details, high ceilings, and beautiful lighting. This wasn't a utilitarian space. It was designed to be inviting and even elegant. The food itself, while standardized by the commissary, was presented beautifully behind the sparkling clean glass, looking tempting and appealing. It wasn't just sustenance. It was a visual feast. Remember that slice of pie? It looked good. The lack of traditional service, while efficient, also contributed to the charm by creating that sense of democratic dining and personal autonomy we discussed. You weren't just a customer, you were an active participant in the dining experience. You chose your food, you operated the mechanism, you poured your own coffee. It felt empowering, like you were in control. This was a far cry from being rushed by a busy waiter or feeling overlooked in a crowded restaurant. It offered a quiet dignity that resonated with people. It was like a choose-your-own-adventure meal, where the only real challenge was having enough nickels. The mainstream historical fact that encapsulates this blend is that the Automat's business model successfully combined the principles of industrial efficiency, including centralized food production and automated service, with a focus on quality, affordability, and an inviting atmosphere, creating a unique and enduring appeal that set it apart from both traditional restaurants and early fast food concepts. It wasn't just one or the other, it was the synergy between the two seemingly opposite forces that made it work. Think about the sounds again, the gentle clink, the soft whir, the rhythmic swoosh. These weren't jarring industrial noises. They were the quiet soundtrack to a pleasant experience. They were the sounds of the charm operating the efficiency. Even the presence of the visible staff, the cashiers exchanging bills for coins, the floor staff cleaning tables, added a layer of human interaction and warmth that prevented the place from feeling completely automated. They were the friendly faces in a mechanical world. One quirky tidbit that illustrates this blend was the design of the coffee spouts themselves. Why make them ornate and decorative, sometimes even shaped like mythical creatures? From a purely efficiency standpoint, a simple pipe would have worked just fine. But Horn and Hardart chose to invest in these visually appealing, slightly whimsical designs. This wasn't about getting the coffee into the cup faster. It was about adding a touch of magic, a moment of delight to a simple act. It was a deliberate choice to infuse the functional with charm, making the everyday extraordinary. Imagine if your water tap at home was shaped like a tiny dragon. It would make getting a glass of water a little more fun, right? Same principle. Historians still argue whether the primary strength of the Automat's model was its ability to lower operating costs through automation and centralization, allowing for lower prices, or its success in creating a novel and comfortable customer experience that fostered loyalty and repeat business? Did the efficiency enable the charm by keeping prices low, or did the charm make the efficiency palatable by softening the mechanical edge? The debate continues, perhaps over a precisely portioned piece of Automat pie, contemplating the perfect balance of ingredients. The peak of the Automat's success in the mid-20th century coincided with an era that increasingly valued both progress and comfort. People were fascinated by technology and efficiency, seeing it as a path to a better future. The Automat fit perfectly into this mindset. It was futuristic and modern. But they also craved spaces that felt welcoming and human, places where they could relax and connect. The Automat managed to be both. It was a space-age diner that still felt like your friendly neighborhood spot. It was a machine that felt like a friend. This unique combination allowed the Automat to appeal to a broad demographic. The efficiency and affordability drew in the working class and those on a budget. The cleanliness, quality food, and inviting atmosphere appealed to middle-class families and even those from higher social strata seeking a quick, unpretentious meal. It wasn't just a cheap place to eat. It was a good place to eat that happened to be affordable and fast. This dual appeal was incredibly powerful and contributed significantly to its widespread popularity. The act of dining there became a unique ritual, a blend of the practical and the enchanting. You'd navigate the practicalities of getting change and selecting your item, but the simple act of the door popping open felt like a small moment of magic. The efficiency was the engine, but the charm was the face it presented to the world, the part that made people smile and kept them coming back. It transformed the mundane act of buying food into a memorable interaction with a delightful, if automated, system. It was proof that you could be efficient without being cold, and charming without being inefficient. So, as you finish that last bite of pie and take a final sip of coffee, you understand the delicate balance the Automat struck at its peak. It was a place where the future of dining seemed to arrive, delivered through little glass doors by unseen hands, powered by mechanical precision and fueled by a commitment to quality and a touch of unexpected charm. It was a paradox that worked beautifully, creating a beloved institution that was efficient enough for the bustling city and charming enough to feel like home. It was, in essence, a perfect machine for imperfectly human needs. You've felt the pulse of its efficiency and basked in the glow of its charm, understanding how that unique blend created a place like no other. But where did that charm come from, visually speaking? How did a restaurant built around walls that ate coins manage to feel so inviting, so far removed from the sterile, utilitarian spaces you might associate with automation? The answer lies in the deliberate, often stunning, architectural and interior design of the Automat itself. This wasn't just a room with machines, it was a carefully crafted environment designed to elevate the simple act of getting a meal. Imagine standing there, still holding your coffee and pie, but now you're consciously taking in the surroundings beyond the food-filled walls. Look up. Many Automat locations, especially the flagship ones in major cities, featured high ceilings. These weren't low, cramped spaces. They were grand, often with ornate plasterwork, decorative moldings, or even skylights that let in natural light, adding to the sense of airiness and spaciousness. The lighting was carefully considered too, often a mix of overhead fixtures, sometimes elegant chandeliers or deco-style lamps, combined with the focused light illuminating the food in the windows. It was bright, clean, and welcoming, far removed from the dingy, dimly lit interiors of some other eateries of the era. The materials used were also a key part of the aesthetic. Gleaming surfaces were everywhere. Polished brass, nickel, or chrome framed the windows and adorned the coffee spouts. Marble or terrazzo floors, often laid in intricate patterns, added a touch of luxury and were easy to keep spotlessly clean, reinforcing Horn and Hardart's reputation for hygiene. Walls might be tiled, paneled in rich wood, or finished with smooth, painted plaster, all contributing to a sense of quality and permanence. Even the tables and chairs, while functional, were often sturdy and well-designed, not cheap or flimsy. This was an environment built to last and built to impress. Horn and Hardart invested heavily in making their automats visually appealing. They understood that the novelty of the mechanism would draw people in the first time, but the overall experience, including the ambience, would keep them coming back. They hired talented architects and designers, embracing popular styles of the era like Art Deco or a refined, modern take on classical styles. Think clean lines, geometric patterns, and a sense of streamlined elegance. The mainstream historical fact here is that Horn and Hardart deliberately employed prominent architects and designers to create visually striking Automat interiors, often featuring Art Deco or Beaux-Arts influences, using high-quality materials like marble, terrazzo, and polished metals to convey a sense of sophistication and cleanliness. This wasn't just decorating a room, it was designing an experience, making the Automat feel less like a cheap lunch counter and more like a modern, accessible palace of food. Contrast this with your expectation of a place where you get food from a wall. You might expect something cold, industrial, maybe a bit sterile. The Automat was the opposite. It felt warm, inviting, and surprisingly elegant. The architecture was part of the charm, softening the mechanical edge of the vending system. It was a deliberate statement: yes, this is efficient and affordable, but it is also beautiful and dignified. You are a valued customer, and you deserve a pleasant environment in which to eat your nickel-priced pie. It was like putting a vending machine inside a fancy hotel lobby. The contrast was part of the appeal. One quirky tidbit about the design was the use of mirrors. Many Automats incorporated large mirrors into their decor, strategically placed on walls or behind the coffee counter. While serving a practical purpose of making the space feel larger and brighter, they also added to the visual spectacle. They reflected the gleaming surfaces, the elegant lighting, and the constant movement of people and the food in the windows. It created a dynamic, ever-changing visual landscape, turning the act of dining into a kind of performance art, reflected back at the diners themselves. You could watch the whole scene unfold, including your own reflection interacting with the mechanical marvels. It was like a low-tech, pre-selfie way of seeing yourself in the middle of the magic. Look, there I am, buying baked beans from a wall. How modern! Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of the elaborate and often expensive Automat architecture was to attract a broader, more upscale clientele beyond the working class, or if it was primarily intended to reinforce the company's commitment to hygiene and quality by creating an environment that felt clean and reputable. Did the fancy decor make people feel like they were getting more than they paid for, thus justifying the concept, or was it simply a necessary backdrop to convince a wary public that machine-dispensed food could be safe and clean? The debate continues, probably taking place in a beautifully preserved, but perhaps slightly dusty, historical society meeting room. The layout of the Automat was also part of its functional design and aesthetic appeal. The main area was dominated by the walls of windows, drawing your eye and directing your movement. Beyond this, there were often separate dining areas with tables and chairs, sometimes arranged in booths for more privacy, or larger communal tables. The coffee counter was usually a prominent feature, a focal point that served as a natural gathering spot. There was a flow to the space, guiding customers from the entrance to the windows, then to the tables, and finally out, all while maintaining a sense of order and ease. Even the placement of the cashier's booth, where you exchanged larger bills for those crucial nickels, was strategic, usually near the entrance but slightly separate from the main food area. The aesthetics extended to the smaller details too. The signage was clear and well designed. The dishes and cutlery, while simple, were clean and uniform. Even the appearance of the food itself in the windows, carefully portioned and arranged, was part of the visual design. It was a holistic approach to creating an environment that was both highly functional and deeply appealing to the senses. It felt modern and clean, a stark contrast to the sometimes chaotic and less hygienic conditions of other public eating places of the era. This commitment to aesthetic quality wasn't just about looking good, it was about building trust. In a time when automated systems were still relatively new and perhaps viewed with some suspicion, a clean, bright, and well-designed space signaled reliability and quality. It said, "We take pride in this place, and by extension, in the food we serve." It reassured customers that the unseen operations behind the wall were just as meticulous as the gleaming facade they presented to the world. It was architecture as a promise of quality. So, as you sit there, taking in the high ceilings, the polished surfaces, the play of light and reflection, you realize the architecture wasn't just a backdrop. It was an integral part of the Automat experience. It was the stage upon which the mechanical ballet of dining unfolded, providing a sense of dignity, comfort, and a touch of unexpected glamour to the simple act of buying food from a wall. It was a testament to the idea that even the most efficient, automated systems could be imbued with charm and beauty, creating a space that was not only functional but truly a pleasure to inhabit, even if just for a quick meal and a legendary cup of coffee. It made you feel good about being there, which is something even the fanciest modern restaurant sometimes struggles to achieve. You've settled in, feeling cocooned by the elegant architecture, the polished surfaces, and the comforting hum of the space. You've admired the gleaming coffee spouts, savored your delicious, affordable meal, and observed the fascinating mix of people around you. You understand the history, the mechanism, the food, the coffee, the social role, the democratic nature, and the paradox of efficiency and charm, all wrapped up in this visually appealing package. But as you look back at those walls of windows, you notice something else, something that speaks to the constant energy and meticulous operation of the Automat, the continuous, almost hypnotic cycle of depletion and replenishment. Watch any section of the wall for a few minutes, especially during a busy time like lunch or dinner. You'll see someone approach a window, drop their coin, and take an item. The little glass door swings shut. For a brief moment, that compartment is empty, a dark void where a tempting treat once sat. But if you keep watching, you'll see it happen. The door might open slightly from the other side, a hand will appear, place a fresh item inside, and the door will close again. Click. Just like that, the magic is restored. A new slice of pie, a fresh sandwich, a steaming bowl of beans, instantly replacing the one that was taken. It's a constant, silent ballet, a performance happening just out of sight, keeping the show going. This wasn't just occasional restocking, it was a perpetual process. The success of the Automat relied on the promise that when you wanted something, it would be there, fresh and ready. This required a dedicated team working tirelessly behind the scenes, monitoring the windows and ensuring they were never empty for long. They were the unseen stagehands in this culinary theater, constantly resetting the scene for the next customer. It was like playing a delicious game of whack-a-mole, but instead of whacking moles, you were filling holes with food, and instead of a mallet, you used your hands and a sense of urgency. Think back to that hidden kitchen we discussed. Beyond the main preparation areas were corridors lined with the back of the Automat walls. Here stood the fillers, or stockers, staff members whose primary job was to keep those hundreds, sometimes thousands, of windows filled. They had trays, carts, and warming/cooling units filled with portions of every item available out front, ready to go at a moment's notice. Their eyes would constantly scan the back of the windows, looking for the telltale sign of an empty compartment, perhaps a light indicating a sale, or simply the absence of food visible through the glass. The double-sided door mechanism was crucial to this ballet. Remember how it worked? When a customer opened the front door with a coin, the back door locked. When the customer closed the front door, or it swung shut on its own, the back door unlocked. This was the stocker's cue. They would open the back door, quickly slide a fresh portion into the compartment, and close the back door. That action would lock the back door again and reset the front door's coin mechanism, making it available for the next customer. It was a smooth, hand-to-machine transfer, repeated hundreds or thousands of times an hour during peak periods. The pace of this work could be intense. Imagine a popular item like baked beans or macaroni and cheese during lunchtime. As soon as a portion was taken, a stocker had to be ready to immediately replace it. This required not only speed and efficiency but also a deep understanding of customer flow and demand. Managers would need to communicate with the stockers, anticipating which items would sell out fastest and ensuring those sections were heavily staffed with fillers and well supplied with prepared food. It was a logistical dance that required constant attention and coordination. It was less Swan Lake and more Benny Hill chase scene, but with more gravy. The mainstream historical fact that highlights this is that the continuous, rapid replenishment of the Automat windows from the kitchen side was a cornerstone of their operational model, ensuring food freshness and availability, and was a key factor in managing high customer volume efficiently. This wasn't just a convenience. It was essential to the promise of the Automat: hot food, fast. If a window stayed empty for too long, the system broke down, customers were disappointed, and the reputation for speed and availability suffered. One quirky tidbit related to the stocking process involves the occasional mishaps. While the system was designed to prevent simultaneous access from both sides, human error or mechanical glitches could sometimes lead to awkward situations. There are anecdotal tales, likely embellished over time, of stockers accidentally bumping a door open from the back just as a customer was reaching in from the front, leading to surprised faces on both sides of the glass. Or imagine a stocker trying to slide a plate in quickly and dropping it, causing a mess behind the scenes while the front window remained stubbornly empty, much to a hungry customer's frustration. These moments were probably rare, but they underscore the constant, unseen human effort required to keep the automated facade running smoothly. It reminds you that even the most perfect machine needs a fallible human somewhere in the loop to really mess things up occasionally. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for this relentless replenishment was purely about maximizing sales by always having items available, or if it was also a deliberate strategy to create a sense of constant activity and freshness that enticed customers to buy more and view the food as truly hot off the line. Did they refill instantly because an empty window was a lost sale, or because the visual cue of constant stocking reinforced the perception of freshness and quality? The debate continues, likely whispered over a hastily restocked bowl of lukewarm something or other. The rhythm of the Automat was dictated by this constant replenishment. The sounds you heard, the clink, the whir, the swoosh, were punctuated by the visual beat of windows emptying and instantly refilling. It created a sense of dynamism, a feeling that the place was always alive and responsive to your needs. You didn't have to wait for a new batch of coffee to be brewed, the spouts were always ready. You didn't have to wonder if they had any more pie in the back. You knew that as soon as one slice was taken, another would likely appear, as if by magic. This daily ballet wasn't glamorous. It was hard work, requiring speed, precision, and stamina from the kitchen staff and stockers. They were the unsung heroes of the Automat, working in the heat and bustle behind the walls, while the customers out front enjoyed the cool, calm efficiency of the automated system. Their labor made the magic possible, turning the architectural marvel into a functioning, high-volume restaurant. They were the human element that prevented the machine from becoming just a static display. So, as you finish your meal and prepare to move on, take one last look at the walls of windows. Appreciate not just the ingenuity of the mechanism or the appeal of the food, but the invisible choreography happening behind the glass. The constant motion, the silent exchange, the relentless dedication to keeping the flow of food moving. It was this daily ballet of replenishment that was the true engine of the Automat's efficiency, ensuring that the charming, coin-operated magic never stopped, one refilled window at a time. It was the unseen effort that made the visible spectacle possible. You've seen the rhythm, the constant, unseen effort behind the walls, ensuring that the delicious flow of food never stopped. At its peak, the Automat felt invincible. It was efficient, affordable, clean, and charming, a perfect machine for feeding a bustling city. It seemed like a concept built to last, a timeless blend of technology and nourishment. But even the most perfectly oiled machines eventually face wear and tear, and even the most charming institutions aren't immune to the relentless march of time and societal change. As the mid-20th century progressed, whispers of change began to circulate, faint at first, then growing louder, challenging the Automat's dominance, and setting the stage for its eventual decline. The world outside the Automat's gleaming doors was changing rapidly. The post-World War II era brought unprecedented prosperity for many Americans, but also significant shifts in lifestyle and demographics. One of the biggest changes was the rise of the automobile and the subsequent movement towards suburban living. People were no longer solely reliant on public transportation or walking distance for everything, including meals. They bought cars, moved out of dense urban centers, and built lives centered around highways, shopping malls, and driveways. This directly impacted the Automat, whose prime locations had always been in the heart of downtown, where foot traffic was king. Suddenly, a restaurant you had to go to in the city center became less convenient when you lived 20 miles away and did your shopping at a suburban plaza. Trying to park a car near a busy downtown Automat was, let's just say, a challenge that might make you lose your appetite entirely. It was like trying to find a single, unsticky key on a well-used vintage keyboard, often frustrating and ultimately unsuccessful. Alongside the suburban shift came changes in how people wanted to eat. While the Automat offered speed, new forms of quick dining were emerging. The seeds of what would become modern fast food were being planted. Early drive-ins and then chains like McDonald's began offering a different kind of speed, less about browsing a wall and more about ordering at a counter, or through a speaker, and getting your food almost instantly, often packaged to eat on the go, and crucially, with ample parking. This appealed to the new car-centric lifestyle. The Automat, with its reliance on physical coins and a sit-down, even if brief, experience, felt less cutting-edge compared to the drive-through window. It was like comparing a beautifully crafted grandfather clock to a digital stopwatch. Both tell time, but one felt increasingly out of step with the modern pace. Economic pressures also began to mount. The Automat's success was built, in large part, on its affordability, particularly the iconic nickel items. But inflation was a reality. The value of a nickel decreased over time, while the costs of ingredients, labor, even with the efficiency, you still needed staff in the kitchen and front of house, and maintaining those complex mechanical systems continued to rise. Horn and Hardart faced an agonizing choice: raise prices and potentially alienate their core, budget-conscious customer base, or absorb the rising costs and see their profits shrink. Eventually, they had to raise prices. The nickel disappeared as the standard price point for many items, replaced by dimes, then quarters, and higher. The mainstream historical fact illustrating this challenge is that the gradual increase in prices, moving away from the universally accessible nickel standard, significantly eroded the Automat's core value proposition and affordability advantage, making it less competitive with newer, cheaper fast food options. That simple nickel, once a symbol of democratic dining, became a relic of a bygone era, taking some of the magic with it. The very design that made the Automat so revolutionary also became a limitation. The fixed walls of windows, while ingenious, lacked flexibility. Adding new menu items or changing offerings significantly required physical modifications. They couldn't easily adapt to changing culinary trends or customer preferences compared to restaurants with traditional kitchens and menus. If suddenly everyone wanted tacos, adding a taco option to the Automat wall wasn't as simple as printing a new menu board. You had to design a compartment, figure out how to keep it hot, but not soggy, and integrate it into the stocking system. This rigidity meant they were slower to innovate than more traditional or nascent fast food competitors. They were a perfect machine for a specific set of tasks, but struggled when the tasks themselves started to change. One quirky tidbit about this period of change is the attempts Horn and Hardart made to adapt. They didn't just sit by idly as the world changed. They experimented with different formats, trying to capture some of the new market share. They opened more conventional restaurants alongside their Automats, and even attempted concepts like cafeterias. There are accounts, though perhaps more in the realm of ambitious planning than widespread reality, of them considering things like Automat drive-thrus or using newer vending technologies. Imagine trying to get a baked bean casserole handed to you through a window by a mechanical arm while sitting in your Ford Fairlane. It sounds like something out of a slightly dystopian future, or maybe just a really ambitious Rube Goldberg machine designed for lunch. These efforts, however, often felt like they were chasing trends rather than setting them, and they never replicated the unique success of the original Automat model. Historians still argue whether the primary cause of the Automat's decline was the external pressures of changing demographics, suburbanization, and new competition, or internal factors such as the company's difficulty in adapting its rigid physical and business model, its reliance on aging technology, and the slow erosion of its affordability advantage. Was the world simply built in a way that eventually left the Automat behind, Or did the company fail to evolve quickly enough to stay relevant? The debate continues, likely among scholars who had to pay significantly more than a nickel for their coffee this morning. The loss of the nickel price point wasn't just an economic shift, it was a psychological one. The nickel had been a symbol of the Automat's accessibility, its promise of a decent meal for pocket change. As prices rose, that unique selling proposition weakened. While still relatively affordable, the Automat was no longer the unquestioned cheapest option, and the magic of getting a substantial item for a single coin was gone. It was like finding out the wizard behind the curtain was just a guy who now charged extra for special effects. The rise of competing eateries also diluted the Automat's novelty. When it first appeared, getting food from a wall was mind-blowing. By the mid-20th century, self-service was becoming more common in various forms, from cafeterias to early vending machines. The unique mechanical marvel of the Automat was no longer the singular futuristic experience it once was. It was still charming, yes, but perhaps less revolutionary in the eyes of a public increasingly accustomed to technological convenience in other areas of their lives. The changing social landscape also played a role. While the Automat had been a vital social hub, other places began to fill that need. Coffee shops, diners, and eventually suburban malls offered alternative spaces for people to gather, eat, and socialize. The specific need for a cheap, accessible, anonymous urban meeting point lessened as the city's structure and social patterns evolved. So, the whispers of change grew into a chorus. The world that had been perfectly suited for the Automat, dense urban centers, foot traffic, a need for affordable efficiency, a fascination with mechanical novelty, was slowly giving way to a new reality of cars, suburbs, changing tastes, and new forms of competition. The qualities that had made the Automat so successful at its peak began to feel less like cutting-edge innovation and more like charming, but perhaps slightly outdated, relics of a different time. The stage was being set for the final act, where the clinking of coins would become less frequent, and the magic behind the glass would begin to fade. You felt those whispers of change, the subtle shifts in the air, the growing challenges to the Automat's reign. What followed wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, gradual fading, like a magnificent old film reel slowly losing its color and clarity. The final coin drops became fewer and farther between, marking the end of an era that had seemed so vibrant and permanent. As the mid-century turned into the later decades, the signs of decline became more visible. The gleaming surfaces that once felt futuristic might start to show their age, the polish perhaps not quite as bright, the marble floors a little more worn. You might notice windows that stayed empty for longer periods, not because they were selling out instantly, but because demand had slackened, or perhaps the mechanism in that particular door was finally giving up the ghost after decades of tireless service. The quiet hum, once a sign of bustling activity, might feel a little more melancholic, the sound of a machine winding down. The crowds weren't quite as thick, the energy a little less palpable. It was like seeing a once-packed theater with only a few scattered patrons. The magic was still there, but the audience had dwindled. The closures started quietly at first. A location in a less busy part of town might shutter its doors. Then another. And another. Each closure was a small loss for the neighborhood, a familiar landmark disappearing. For loyal customers, it was a sign that their beloved Automat wasn't as invincible as it seemed. The reasons were complex, a culmination of the pressures we discussed. Rising costs meant prices had to increase, making the Automat less of a budget haven compared to newer fast food chains that were optimizing their operations for even lower price points and faster service. That iconic nickel, once a symbol of accessibility, was long gone, replaced by prices that, while still reasonable, didn't hold the same revolutionary appeal. Paying 35 cents for a sandwich didn't feel quite as magical as paying 5 cents used to. It was like finding out your favorite superhero now charges per punch. The mechanical heart of the Automat, once its greatest strength, also became a liability. Those intricate coin mechanisms and double-sided windows required constant maintenance. As the systems aged, they needed more repairs, and finding parts or skilled mechanics to work on early 20th-century machinery became increasingly difficult and expensive. Newer competitors didn't have walls full of complex mechanics. They had simpler counter-service or drive-through windows that were cheaper to build and maintain. The Automat was a beautiful, high-tech machine, but it belonged to a previous generation of technology. It was like trying to compete with modern streaming services using a state-of-the-art VCR player, impressive for its time, but ultimately outmatched. Customer tastes were also evolving. While comfort food classics remained popular, the fixed, somewhat rigid menu of the Automat struggled to keep pace with changing culinary trends. Newer restaurants could easily introduce new items, seasonal specials, or respond to dietary needs, like, say, the sudden desire for avocado toast, which probably wouldn't fit neatly into an Automat window. The Automat's strength was consistency and volume, not culinary innovation. It was great at what it did, but what people wanted changed. For the employees, especially those who had worked behind the scenes for years, seeing locations close was heartbreaking. They were the hidden engine, remember? The ones who kept the daily ballet going. Their skills in managing the commissary system, stocking the windows with lightning speed, and maintaining the complex machinery were incredibly specific to the Automat. As the chain shrank, their livelihoods were impacted, and a unique set of operational expertise slowly faded away. The decline wasn't uniform. Some flagship locations, particularly in busy Manhattan spots, held on longer, buoyed by nostalgia and sheer foot traffic. But even they weren't immune. The company, Horn and Hardart, tried diversifying, getting into other restaurant ventures and even retail, but their core identity remained tied to the Automat, and as it weakened, so did the company's overall fortunes. The mainstream historical fact marking this decline is poignant. The very last Horn and Hardart Automat location, situated in New York City, finally closed its doors on April 13, 1991. This wasn't just the end of a single restaurant. It was the official closing chapter on a concept that had defined a century of urban dining for millions. Imagine that final day, the last nickel dropped into a slot, the last little glass door opening, the last portion of mac and cheese retrieved. It was a quiet farewell to a once roaring institution. One quirky tidbit about the end of the Automat era involves what happened to the iconic equipment. When locations closed, especially the large ones, the fixtures and machinery were often sold off. Those beautiful, ornate coffee spouts, the gleaming window walls, the marble counters, they were dismantled and dispersed. Some ended up in museums, preserved as artifacts of a bygone era. Others were bought by collectors, salvaged for architectural elements, or repurposed in other businesses. It's strange to think of a dragon-headed coffee spout ending up in someone's private collection, no longer hissing with hot coffee, just standing silently as a relic. Or imagining a section of the window wall installed in a quirky modern restaurant, a ghost of its former bustling self, maybe dispensing craft beer? The thought is both amusing and a little sad. Historians still argue whether the primary factor in the Automat's final demise was the simple inability to compete on price and convenience with the burgeoning fast food industry, the crippling cost and inflexibility of maintaining the aging mechanical infrastructure, or the fundamental shift in urban life and consumer behavior that left its walk-in, coin-operated model increasingly irrelevant. Was it killed by McDonald's, mechanical failure, or suburban sprawl? The debate continues, likely held in a place where you have to explain to the cashier what cash is. As the last locations closed, the Automat transitioned from a living, breathing part of the city to a memory. For those who had experienced it, it became a source of nostalgia, a story to tell younger generations about a time when food came from walls and cost a nickel. Photographs and old newsreel footage became the only way to see the magic in action. The concept, once so revolutionary, became a charming artifact, a symbol of a different pace, a different economy, a different relationship with technology and food. The end of the Automat was more than just the closure of a restaurant chain. It was the fading of a unique cultural institution. It had fed, sheltered, and charmed millions, providing democratic dining and a touch of mechanical magic in the heart of the city. Its demise wasn't a sudden, dramatic event, but a slow, quiet retreat from the modern world it had once helped to define. The final coin drops echoed not just in the empty slots, but in the collective memory of a city that had loved its coin-operated magic. The last coin has clinked into the slot, the last little glass door has been opened and closed, and the lights have dimmed on the final horn and hard art automat. The physical places may be gone, existing now only in photographs, museum exhibits, and the hazy memories of those who experienced them. But the ideas, the innovations, the sheer audacity of the concept? Those didn't disappear. They echoed forward, sometimes loudly and clearly, sometimes as faint whispers, influencing the way we eat, shop, and interact with technology for decades to come. The automat didn't just die, it transformed, its spirit living on in the fabric of modern retail and dining, even if we don't always recognize its lineage. It's like how your grandpa's quirky habit of saving rubber bands suddenly makes sense when you realize you do it too. The influence is there, even if the context has changed. Think about what the automat truly pioneered. It wasn't just selling food, it was selling efficiency and convenience through automation. It was demonstrating that you could remove the direct human server from a transaction and still provide a reliable, dignified experience. This was revolutionary for its time, and it laid crucial groundwork for countless businesses that followed. Let's start with the most obvious inheritor of the automat's speed and affordability mantle, the modern fast food industry. While the service model is different, counter service or drive-through instead of a wall, the core principles are strikingly similar. Fast food chains thrive on speed, consistent product quality, or at least, consistent product, and low prices achieved through efficiency and volume. Where did they get those ideas? In part, they came from the automat. The mainstream historical fact here is that Horn and Hardart's pioneering use of centralized commissary kitchens for mass food production and ensuring consistency across multiple locations was a direct precursor to the supply chain and preparation methods adopted by later fast food chains. Companies like McDonald's studied efficient operations, and the automat, with its ability to serve thousands daily with remarkable consistency, was a prime example of how to do that on a large scale. They took the idea of making the food elsewhere and bringing it in, perfected the assembly line behind the counter, and replaced the mechanical windows with a human hand doing the final transfer. Same principle of speed and consistent product, different delivery method. But the influence goes beyond just fast food chains. Consider the broader concept of self-service. The automat was arguably the first widespread example of customers serving themselves in a restaurant setting, beyond maybe a basic buffet. That idea proliferated. Cafeterias, where you slide a tray down a rail and pick items yourself? That owes a debt to the automat's self-selection model. Salad bars, where you build your own meal from a selection of components? Directly in the lineage of browsing options and taking what you want. Even bulk food bins in grocery stores, where you scoop your own granola. It's that same principle of the customer being the one to retrieve the product. The automat normalized the idea that you didn't always need someone else to hand you your food. You could get it yourself, quickly and easily. It was the original DIY dinner, minus the assembly instructions and the existential dread of burnt toast. Then there's the most direct descendant, vending machines. The automat was, at its heart, a giant, sophisticated vending machine restaurant. While basic vending machines existed before the automat, selling things like gum or postcards, the automat elevated the concept to include substantial, fresh food items and hot beverages. Modern vending machines that dispense everything from hot coffee and sandwiches to electronics, and even full meals in some parts of the world? They are the direct, albeit sometimes less charming, grandchildren of the automat's mechanical marvel. The technology has advanced far beyond those simple nickel slots and spring-loaded doors, but the fundamental idea, drop money in, get product out, no human needed for the core transaction, remains the same. There are even modern attempts to revive the automat concept, often using touchscreen interfaces and robotic delivery systems instead of mechanical windows, proving the core idea still has appeal. It turns out people still like getting food from a wall, as long as it accepts Apple Pay. The automat also influenced the experience of quick dining. It demonstrated that efficiency didn't have to mean a complete lack of atmosphere. While later fast food places often went for purely functional design, The Automat showed that you could have speed and affordability alongside cleanliness and even a touch of elegance. This idea of a comfortable, clean, and accessible space for quick meals is something many modern fast casual restaurants strive for. They want to be faster than a sit-down restaurant but nicer than a traditional fast food joint, occupying that middle ground the Automat arguably pioneered. One quirky tidbit about the Automat's legacy involves the specific design elements. Those iconic coffee spouts, for example, with their ornate shapes and satisfying swoosh, were a unique piece of design that combined function and flair. While you don't see dragon-headed spouts in Starbucks, the idea of a dedicated, self-serve coffee station that is a central, prominent feature of a quick-service environment is something that many coffee shops and delis adopted. The visual spectacle of the food behind glass also lives on in various forms, from deli counters to bakery displays. The emphasis on presentation and letting the customer choose with their eyes is a direct echo of the Automat's window display strategy. You can thank or blame the Automat for making you hungry just by looking at a display case. Historians still argue whether the primary legacy of the Automat lies in its specific technological innovations, like the coin-op windows or commissaries, that were directly copied or adapted by later businesses, or if its influence was more conceptual, demonstrating the viability and appeal of speed, affordability, self-service, and centralized production as key drivers for success in the modern food industry, inspiring others to find their own ways to achieve those goals. Was it a blueprint for specific methods, or simply proof of concept for a new way of eating? The debate continues, likely over a meal that arrived via a delivery app, paid for with a digital wallet, a far cry from a nickel and a clinking door, but undeniably part of the same lineage of convenience. Even beyond food, the principles of the Automat can be seen. Self-checkout kiosks in grocery stores and retail? You're performing part of the transaction yourself, reducing the need for staff at every point, just like operating an Automat window. Automated package pickup points? Similar idea. A product is waiting in a compartment for you to access with a code, bypassing direct human interaction for retrieval. The Automat normalized the idea of interacting directly with a machine to get a product, paving the way for a vast array of automated retail experiences we take for granted today. It was the original click and collect, just with more coins and less clicking. So, while the charming, coin-operated magic of dining at an early 20th century Automat may exist only in memory, its spirit is very much alive. Every time you grab a quick, affordable meal, whether it's from a fast food drive-thru, a cafeteria line, or even a modern vending machine, you're experiencing the echoes of Horn and Hardart's revolutionary idea. Every time you use a self-checkout machine or pick up a package from an automated locker, you're seeing the legacy of a place that taught the world that efficiency, technology, and customer autonomy could transform the everyday act of getting what you need. The Automat was more than just a restaurant. It was a glimpse into the future, a future that, in many ways, we are living in today, one automated transaction at a time. Its magic didn't vanish. It simply dispersed, woven into the fabric of modern convenience, a silent nod to the walls that once served dinner with a clink and a whir. The last coin has clinked into the slot, the last little glass door has been opened and closed, and the lights have dimmed on the final Horn and Hardart Automat. The physical places may be gone, existing now only in photographs, museum exhibits, and the hazy memories of those who experienced them. But the ideas, the innovations, the sheer audacity of the concept? Those didn't disappear. They echoed forward, sometimes loudly and clearly, sometimes as faint whispers, influencing the way we eat, shop, and interact with technology for decades to come. The Automat didn't just die, it transformed, its spirit living on in the fabric of modern retail and dining, even if we don't always recognize its lineage. It's like how your grandpa's quirky habit of saving rubber bands suddenly makes sense when you realize you do it too. The influence is there, even if the context has changed. Think about what the Automat truly pioneered. It wasn't just selling food, it was selling efficiency and convenience through automation. It was demonstrating that you could remove the direct human server from a transaction and still provide a reliable, dignified experience. This was revolutionary for its time, and it laid crucial groundwork for countless businesses that followed. Let's start with the most obvious inheritor of the Automat's speed and affordability mantle, the modern fast food industry. While the service model is different, counter service or drive-through instead of a wall, the core principles are strikingly similar. Fast food chains thrive on speed, consistent product quality, or at least, consistent product, and low prices achieved through efficiency and volume. Where did they get those ideas? In part, they came from the Automat. The mainstream historical fact here is that Horn and Hardart's pioneering use of centralized commissary kitchens for mass food production and ensuring consistency across multiple locations was a direct precursor to the supply chain and preparation methods adopted by later fast food chains. Companies like McDonald's studied efficient operations, and the Automat, with its ability to serve thousands daily with remarkable consistency, was a prime example of how to do that on a large scale. They took the idea of making the food elsewhere and bringing it in, perfected the assembly line behind the counter, and replaced the mechanical windows with a human hand doing the final transfer. Same principle of speed and consistent product, different delivery method. But the influence goes beyond just fast food chains. Consider the broader concept of self-service. The Automat was arguably the first widespread example of customers serving themselves in a restaurant setting, beyond maybe a basic buffet. That idea proliferated. Cafeterias, where you slide a tray down a rail and pick items yourself? That owes a debt to the Automat's self-selection model. Salad bars, where you build your own meal from a selection of components? Directly in the lineage of browsing options and taking what you want. Even bulk food bins in grocery stores, where you scoop your own granola. It's that same principle of the customer being the one to retrieve the product. The Automat normalized the idea that you didn't always need someone else to hand you your food. You could get it yourself, quickly and easily. It was the original DIY dinner, minus the assembly instructions and the existential dread of burnt toast. Then there's the most direct descendant, vending machines. The Automat was, at its heart, a giant, sophisticated vending machine restaurant. While basic vending machines existed before the Automat, selling things like gum or postcards, the Automat elevated the concept to include substantial, fresh food items and hot beverages. Modern vending machines that dispense everything from hot coffee and sandwiches to electronics, and even full meals in some parts of the world? They are the direct, albeit sometimes less charming, grandchildren of the Automat's mechanical marvel. The technology has advanced far beyond those simple nickel slots and spring-loaded doors, but the fundamental idea, drop money in, get product out, no human needed for the core transaction, remains the same. There are even modern attempts to revive the Automat concept, often using touchscreen interfaces and robotic delivery systems instead of mechanical windows, proving the core idea still has appeal. It turns out people still like getting food from a wall, as long as it accepts Apple Pay. The Automat also influenced the experience of quick dining. It demonstrated that efficiency didn't have to mean a complete lack of atmosphere. While later fast food places often went for purely functional design, the Automat showed that you could have speed and affordability alongside cleanliness, and even a touch of elegance. This idea of a comfortable, clean, and accessible space for quick meals is something many modern fast casual restaurants strive for. They want to be faster than a sit-down restaurant but nicer than a traditional fast food joint, occupying that middle ground the Automat arguably pioneered. One quirky tidbit about the Automat's legacy involves the specific design elements. Those iconic coffee spouts, for example, with their ornate shapes and satisfying swoosh, were a unique piece of design that combined function and flair. While you don't see dragon-headed spouts in Starbucks, the idea of a dedicated, self-serve coffee station that is a central, prominent feature of a quick-service environment is something that many coffee shops and delis adopted. The visual spectacle of the food behind glass also lives on in various forms, from deli counters to bakery displays. The emphasis on presentation and letting the customer choose with their eyes is a direct echo of the Automat's window display strategy. You can thank or blame the Automat for making you hungry just by looking at a display case. Historians still argue whether the primary legacy of the Automat lies in its specific technological innovations, like the coin-op windows or commissaries, that were directly copied or adapted by later businesses, or if its influence was more conceptual, demonstrating the viability and appeal of speed, affordability, self-service, and centralized production as key drivers for success in the modern food industry, inspiring others to find their own ways to achieve those goals. Was it a blueprint for specific methods, or simply proof of concept for a new way of eating? The debate continues, likely over a meal that arrived via a delivery app, paid for with a digital wallet, a far cry from a nickel and a clinking door, but undeniably part of the same lineage of convenience. Even beyond food, the principles of the automat can be seen. Self-checkout kiosks in grocery stores and retail? You're performing part of the transaction yourself, reducing the need for staff at every point, just like operating an automat window. Automated package pickup points? Similar idea. A product is waiting in a compartment for you to access with a code, bypassing direct human interaction for retrieval. The automat normalized the idea of interacting directly with a machine to get a product, paving the way for a vast array of automated retail experiences we take for granted today. It was the original click and collect, just with more coins and less clicking. So, while the charming, coin-operated magic of dining at an early 20th century automat may exist only in memory, its spirit is very much alive. Every time you grab a quick, affordable meal, whether it's from a fast food drive-thru, a cafeteria line, or even a modern vending machine, you're experiencing the echoes of Horn and Hardart's revolutionary idea. Every time you use a self-checkout machine or pick up a package from an automated locker, you're seeing the legacy of a place that taught the world that efficiency, technology, and customer autonomy could transform the everyday act of getting what you need. The automat was more than just a restaurant. It was a glimpse into the future, a future that, in many ways, we are living in today, one automated transaction at a time. Its magic didn't vanish. It simply dispersed, woven into the fabric of modern convenience, a silent nod to the walls that once served dinner with a clink and a whir. And now, as our journey through the charming, coin-operated magic of the automat draws to a close, feel the quiet settle in once more. The sounds of clinking coins, whirring mechanisms, and the gentle swoosh of coffee spouts begin to fade, receding into the soft distance of the past. The gleaming surfaces dim, the elegant architecture softens around the edges, becoming less defined, more like a fond memory. You can still see the rows of little glass windows in your mind's eye, each one holding a tiny, edible treasure, waiting patiently. Remember the simple satisfaction of dropping a coin, the gentle pop of the door, the perfect slice of pie retrieved by your own hand. This unique place, this blend of mechanism and meal, efficiency and charm, offered a moment of dignity, affordability, and quiet wonder in the bustling city. It showed us a different way of dining, a different way of interacting, a different way of experiencing the everyday magic hidden just behind the glass. As the final echoes grow faint, let the feeling of this remarkable era wash over you. The lights are low now, the hum is soft, like a distant lullaby. You are safe here, drifting gently away from the past, carrying the memory of a truly special place. Just relax, breathe slowly, and let the images fade into a peaceful dream.